Okay. Well, I can't see everybody, but I can see myself, which is an odd feeling to say the least. But as you know, we've said, I've done this before. Um, want to do just a little bit of an introduction, but not a full rehash because I'm assuming that most of you are probably familiar with me either through my previous pitch webinar that I've done, or some other group sessions or any other way you may have come across me through Roadmap Writers. This session I'm seeing more as a way to, it's more extra advice and extra on top of the first pitch webinar that I did back in December. I won't, ideally, I'm not going to be doing a rehash of the basics here. I do encourage those of you who haven't seen the original pitch webinar to go back and take a look at it if you haven't yet. But I also don't want to bore you all with another reintroduction to who I am. Just know that, since the previous webinar was recorded in December 2017, it was right around the time when I was launching the management company that I have, that now I've been, I have the experience of starting up and running a management company from scratch, basically, in a full-time capacity. I've had that experience now for about 8 months. It's going very well, but taught me a lot of things that when I look back at December 8 months ago, I'm not sure how much of it I actually did know. I learned so much in this time. I've had projects in these past 8 months pitched to me on a daily basis in that amount of time. I've learned as well to keep fine-tuning my pitching because I have to pitch clients and their projects every single day, multiple times a day to multiple different people. So I've gotten a lot of experience since the last time I've done this. Now, in preparing for this webinar, I did go back and take a look at the one from December. And when I really do break down and look at it again, break it all down, I do think that everything that we spoke about last time is still valid. There was nothing when I was looking over it now where I was cringing and saying, I wish I didn't have, or I wish I didn't say that. I didn't have that feeling at all about any of it. So, we'll just go from there. One thing I want to remind and there will be a couple of reminders in here because we're building off of what we spoke about last time. First thing I want to remind people of is what is really the purpose of a pitch, right? The purpose of a pitch is not to just, give me every nook and cranny and twist and turn of your story. The purpose of your pitch is to make me want to read your script. That's all it's supposed to do. And I do hope that this is just a reminder. Make me want to read your script with the pitch that you're giving to me that's built off of your script. Now, I've seen writers, in the past 8 months and before that, I've seen writers really working hard to clarify their pitches, to get them succinct, to get them all properly formatted, to get them looking very nicely and very kind of sleek. Technically everything is there, but despite having this very nice package of the pitch, sometimes things just aren't working. Like there's something not clicking, like execs are not requesting the script, even though we have a very sleek and nice package here. Now, why is that? I've been through that myself. I've spoken very well about a particular project that I'm trying to get people interested in, or a client that I'm trying to get people interested in, but for some reason, it's just not hooking the executive and they don't care. So why? Why is that? And how can we fix this? How can we get past that roadblock? Now, one of the things I've learned to do is I'm constantly tinkering with my client pitches. I'm always trying out new things. I'm trying out new wordings to try to see what is going to work. And, not everything that I pitch everyone's going to work with everyone. But the key here, and it goes back to something we talked about last time, is to practice your pitches. When you're practicing these things, constantly look at, pay attention to what the listener is actually sitting on the edge of their seat for. Like in the best pitches you're ever going to have, you're not just going to be reading from something, you're going to be looking into, looking at the person that you're giving the pitch to, and you're going to be able to sense, is this person really, are they on the edge of their seat? Do you see them emotionally engaged in it? You can read that on a person when they're hearing a story. When you've done it enough, you can start to get a sense of how that works, even if you're doing it over the phone, if you're just doing it verbally. Like I have to deliver a lot of pitches in basically under 2 minutes when I'm on the phone with somebody. And I can usually tell when I have someone, one of the ways I can tell is like, is this person, are they agreeing at certain points where I want them to agree, where they're like, yeah. Like you listen to some of those verbal affirmations, and in the moments where you've got something that's really emotionally gripping, are they silent? Do you suddenly feel like all the air has been sucked out of the conversation? That's a good thing if you're using that technique right. You can usually tell when you don't have someone, you're probably not going to have this experience working with the execs that are here at the roadmap thing, but I have the experience of when I'm on the phone with someone, I know that I don't have them when I can hear the clicking and the clacking of the keyboard, because they're clearly not paying attention to anything that I'm saying. So I encourage you all to be active listeners while you're delivering your pitches too. And this, again, we're talking a lot about verbal pitches here. This won't be something where we're focusing so much on the written pitches, but you're going to find that some of these techniques that I'm going to talk about today will also apply to the way you put together some of your written pitches. But again, I encourage you to practice these things, to pay attention to the people that you're practicing with, and every now and then experiment with a new way to deliver something, a new way to word something. And sometimes another way you can really benefit from listening to people is if someone has read your script, or if someone has read your pitch or listened to your pitch, ask them to rephrase the pitch to you. What do they remember from that pitch? I've had an instance, or I've had many instances of this, but there's one in particular in the past month where I had for months been pitching a particular client script to many executives in a very specific way. Now, I gave this, I didn't end up pitching this to a particular exec who read it. This exec read it though and came back to me and said, it was like this and like this and like that. They were pitching their enjoyment of the script to me, and I saw them pitching it in a way that I never would have thought about to begin with, but I liked it so much that I actually started stealing that exec's pitch, stealing those techniques that exec was pitching back to me. So I encourage you, again, practice, listen to people that you're practicing with and get feedback from them. It's one of the best ways you can fine tune your pitches. And I guess that's what a lot of this is that we're talking about today. Is like, how do you fine tune these things? How do you get it to that extra step? So another thing that is very important to understand, and you should always be reminding yourself of this, is that not everyone is going to like the same story. There's no magic bullet that works on everybody. There's no story out there that's going to be as emotionally affecting to everyone, because everyone has a vastly different experience of life, and not everything is going to hook with everyone. I have an example of that for one of my client scripts. I do apologize in advance for not getting into specifics at certain points when it comes to client pitches that I'm using for examples, because I don't want to give away certain, in confidential client material. But what I will say is that there is a particular script that I have from a writing team that deals with a very controversial subject, but it's a true story. And I have, I've been pitching this for months now, and I have the pitch down pat. Like I could do it with my, I could do it in my sleep basically. And I notice now, just in the past 2 weeks, There was one day where I delivered the pitch in person to an executive who couldn't have cared less. This executive was, fiddling with his fidget spinner and, twirling around in his chair and looking for anything else to pay attention to, was not interested in the pitch whatsoever and was very dismissive of it. Okay, that sucked, but, I wasn't going to let that get me down. And then 2 days later, I pitched it to another executive who was literally on the edge of their seat. And it was the experience of pitching to the person who was on the edge of their seat. I could feel them becoming an active participant in this whole storytelling process, because at certain points where I was talking about the story, I could see them wanting to ask questions. I could see them kind of just, sitting up and being fully at attention and be fully into this. There was nothing different in terms of how I pitched it to them. Absolutely nothing different. It was exactly the same in both instances. The difference in those cases was this a story that the particular exec was going to be into? The first one, obviously not. It seemed like he had something more important to focus on, and it wasn't the pitch. But I'm not going to take that personally. Not every story is going to apply or make sense to everyone. But the next exec that I had pitched it to was so into it that he read the script the very next day, called me the very next day, basically breathless, saying how excited he was and the types of partners that he's going to be, talking to the script about. And, now he's meeting with my clients. It's a very good feeling. But if I had taken that first, had taken that first response to mean that my pitch was incorrect or that something was wrong with it, I might have gone in a completely, started pitching it in a completely different way, or I might have shelved it, or I might have moved on from it. And I never would have gotten to the person who 2 days later was absolutely in love with it. And I want to say that as a reminder, because we shouldn't be caring about or focusing on the people that are going to be dismissive of your story, because there's nothing you can do to change someone's mind like that. It's not worth your time. There are so many more executives and so many more companies out there that who cares if one particular person is going to be dismissive or think that your story doesn't hold any water. Just, okay, that's fine. Let's move on to the next person who might, and on eventually to the person who will be in love with it. So really, when we're talking about some of these more advanced pitching techniques, we got to look at the focus here. And the focus should not be on winning over the people who are going to be dismissive. You're never going to win them over. So don't waste your time. I'm not going to focus on them, so neither should you. There are some people who just in general lack imagination, and plenty of people out here in Hollywood only understand the concept of chasing heat. Okay. And when I say chasing heat, if you haven't heard that expression before, it's basically this idea of, if executives are hearing that there's a script out there that's hot, suddenly they're interested in it. And you'll find that all the time happening where, I'll even use that to my advantage, where once I know that an exec has really favorably responded to a script, you better believe that I'm going to go talk to other executives who I know only respond to heat and tell them so-and-so likes this. You might as well pay attention to it now. But because that's the only way that certain people, those types of people who chase heat, that's the only way they're going to ever really get invested enough to give their time over to reading a script. So, the heat chasers, the people who lack imagination, don't waste your time. That's not something we're going to be able to fix in terms of how we verbally pitch ourselves. So then what do we focus on? We focus on the people who are capable of being put on the edge of their seats. How do we end up hooking them? We should care about them, and we should find the ways to get them invested and interested in things. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So again, I'm going to go back to another basic, and this is a basic about communication in general. And this is one of the reasons that, it feels a little odd to me here to be basically talking to myself. But I know other people are listening. The key to a successful set of communications is to understand your audience. You got to understand your audience going into a set of a specific, communication transaction. And you also have to understand your audience in a growing sense. Like when I'm talking to someone, am I paying attention to how they're reacting to the way that I'm telling them the story? If I feel like I'm not engaging their emotions, I better bring my emotions to the table more so that they'll feel more contagious to them. So understanding your audience is very important here. You got to put yourself in an exec's shoes before and while you're pitching to them. Give me just a second here. So let's talk a little bit about what the perspective is of someone who has sit down to hear your pitch for the first time. There are a couple of different thoughts that always go through my mind when I'm sitting down for a big pitch session, whether it's something with a group of writers who are pitching ideas to me, whether it's a pitch session with Roadmap, or whether it's an in-person, like big festival type pitch session, or someone's pitching me over the phone. There are a number of goals here. First and foremost, any exec who is open to hearing pitches, they want to find material, and they would love to find something that excites them. They want to find this because it's helpful to their job, especially these junior executives who are actively tasked with looking for material. Like any creative executive that you're sitting down with, or any coordinator, or even any enterprising assistant, the way they make a name for themselves is by finding great material that they can bring into their company, whether it's at an agency or a management company or at a production company or a studio. If you can find something that you are the source for, you can make a name for yourself, and that's how you can start moving yourself up the ladder. That's what's going through an exec's mind when they're sitting down listening to something. So they want to find something that's going to excite them. They want to find something that they feel like they can sell. So that's what they're thinking when they're sitting down to hear some pitches. The next thing that's going through their heads is, if I'm sitting down for a number of pitches, I'm possibly going to hear dozens of other pitches today. You as a writer may be given that, you're given like an 8-minute session usually, especially through Roadmap, which is a good amount of time. A lot of other places only give you like 2 minutes. And usually, like I said, when I'm on the phone with somebody, I usually have about 2 minutes, 5 minutes max to get someone's attention enough. So, but anyway, any executive is going to hear dozens of pitches any day that they're going to hear any pitches. And so they're looking for what is going to stand out to me out of all these pitches that are coming at me, all these different faces that are coming to me, and, documents that are coming through, all these things that are coming across my desk or being put in front of me. What is going to stand out? What's going to stand out from all those other things? Or does this particular pitch sound exactly the same as everything else I'm hearing? Like the specific story beats may be somewhat different, but does it just feel the same? Like, does something feel different about it? That's ultimately what's going to rise to the top. And we're going to talk more about how to make that, feeling possible. So another thought that you have to realize is always going through an executive's mind when they're considering pitches or considering scripts is that reading a script is a commitment of time and therefore money. For all of us who are, if I'm a manager, or if I'm an agent, if I'm an executive or a producer, I only have a certain number of hours that I'm awake during the day, and a certain number of hours during the week that I have to devote to active business that I'm working on, to people that I've already committed to, and things that are necessary to keep my lights on, to keep me fed, to keep me alive, basically. And so any amount of time, especially an hour or an hour and a half, or in some cases 2 hours, that amount of time that needs to be set aside to read a script, that's a commitment. That's a big commitment of time that they could be putting to any number of other things. So you do need to understand that any executive has a very high bar for what they're going to accept to read, because if they're going to read something, it's going to be something that's going to ask for them to commit time and therefore money to it. So another thought that's going through an exec's head is that if they do find something that they might be interested in, that they're going to have to eventually sell that kind of up the chain, and how there's a couple of things to think about here. So I've read a script. I like it. I want to do something with it. In order for me to do something with it, it's not just about saying to the writer, oh, hey, I want to do something with it, and that's it. And then I go do it myself. No, I've got to go then pitch it to my part. Like in my case, I have to pitch it to my partner, get my partner to read it. Then if we like it, we have to go pitch it to financiers. We have to go pitch it to studios. We would have to go pitch it to potential directors. There's a whole, like, we would have to sell that kind of up the chain to other people in order to do anything with it. And when we do that, we're essentially putting our reputation on the line for a piece of material that we found. So before I even commit to reading a script after hearing a pitch, like, I have to feel that that pitch is like makes me confident enough that I can put my reputation on the line for this, because I have to go and pitch it to all these other people in order to do anything with it. And something you need to recognize too is that whenever anyone goes out, it's a scary thing when anyone goes out with a new piece of material and says, I think this is good. I think you, the person, like if I'm an exec pitching to a financier, I think you would like this enough to put up $1 million to make this, or tens of millions of dollars to make this. It's a huge ask on my reputation. I'm putting my reputation, my livelihood on the line to promote a script like that. So there's a whole chain of things that executives are thinking about before they ever even commit to reading a script, and many different boxes that they're thinking about, like, is this going to be good enough for me to like feel something from it? Is this going to be good enough for me to feel like I can pitch it to someone and put my reputation on the line? Put yourself in the exec's shoes and you'll understand why certain things need to be communicated in certain ways to them. So the other part to think about there, it's another facet of this, is we have to, as execs, we have to sell something kind of through the chain of Hollywood to make a movie to begin with. But then even after a movie is made, the basic story underlying that movie or underlying that television show then has to be pitched again to potential audiences, or else we're not going to see any money back from all of this work that we put into actually making this film. And so you have to, what an exec is also thinking about is this central story idea, like the hook of this story, is this strong enough for us to, is this strong enough so that when an audience goes to watch this in the theater or watch this on a television screen or on their phone or on their computer, is this good enough and communicable enough? Maybe that's not the best word, but is this easy enough to communicate through word of mouth so that the story essentially will go viral? Is this something that, it's one thing, you'll see this a lot. It's one thing for a blockbuster movie to fool people to go in on opening weekend, right? Like you can make the marketing such that people will walk into the movie theater and pay for that first weekend of tickets, right? But how do we get like a real success, which is what everybody wants, and you're not really going to make most of your money back unless you hit the lottery, like the figurative lottery, your first weekend. The real money comes in is, does this movie have legs? Does this project have a life beyond its opening day? And the way that something has a life on the opening day is if the audience who's seen it that opening day likes it enough and finds it easy enough to pitch to other people to go and see it. If you've had that experience before, which I hope most of you had or have had, where you go and see a movie in the theater and you're so riveted by it, you're so excited by it, that when you get out of the theater, you have to tell other people about it. And you're essentially convincing them to go spend their hard-earned money to go see the movie on another day. That's what we want to find in movies. We want to find things that are going to go viral, right? Like that. We do want to find things that are basically going to survive that game of telephone, where is this idea strong enough and easy to communicate enough that it will be something that has a life of its own. All of these things I'm thinking about when I'm sitting down to hear a pitch. And that's why I turn down a lot of pitches, because it's very hard to meet that bar. But there are things that do meet that bar. The other thing that any exec, and this is the last thing before we get into some more like specific techniques, but this is just, again, how do we think like an executive? Especially, well, I wanted to say, especially if you're pitching to a representative, or if a representative is hearing a pitch, we want writers who can tell stories. Like, we want effective writers. We don't want people who can just come up with a neat concept, but we want people who are actually going to engage my emotions and be able to tell me a story, even if it is telling me a story in only 5 minutes. Note that I've had to tell stories in 2 minutes. And if you go and look at, and we'll talk about this more again too, if you go and look at trailers tell stories in 2 minutes or less as well. If a writer cannot engage my emotions enough through a story in a short amount of time, like 8 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, or whatever, why would I believe that same writer could do that in a 90 to 120 page script? If you can't effectively tell me a story in a short amount of time, why should I give you 90 minutes to 2 hours of my time to sit down and read a script where, if you haven't convinced me that I'm going to actually feel something when I sit down to do it? And like I said, I was going to say this is a particular like representative type of feeling, but it's not solely something that representatives look for. Producers and executives want that as well in any writer that they're looking at. They want to know that, are we potentially getting into business with a writer who knows how to tell stories, who can make those twists and turns, who we can work with and give notes to. Like, we want writers who are actively able to do these things. So you want to be able to show that in your pitches. So now let's talk more about some specific techniques, because we've talked a lot about what is going through an executive's mind. So how do we tailor our pitches more to that particular perception, that point of view that an exec is going to have when they're sitting down to hear something from you? So it should be obvious by now, but I want to state it very clearly that your pitch should create the same emotions that your script is meant to create, right? So if I'm hearing your pitch, I should be feeling some of the same things, the same type of tone, same type of emotions that I'm going to be feeling when I sit down to read all 90 to 120 pages of your script. And if your script, the script itself, does not create emotions, then I want to encourage you to go start over. Because if your story is not meant to create emotions, you're not really telling us a story. And this is important because, people don't typically remember every specific plot point that they hear crammed into a pitch. What we usually remember is we recall the emotions that a pitch made us feel. You're often going to hear executives say that they want to hear, or they want a script that is going to make them feel something. I want it to make me feel something. I want it to have an Amblin feel. I want it to feel like those 1980s Steven Spielberg movies. I want it to make me cry. I want it to make my heart start to pound. I want to feel a sense of justice from it. People don't remember those specific plot points, those specific twists and turns. How many times have you yourself, or have you heard other people talk about how a script, or no, not a script, but how a movie made them feel, but they can't remember exactly how it got to that point for them, right? The most important thing to leave people with is that feeling of an emotion, because emotions are things that catch. Emotions are things that are contagious. I was listening to a podcast recently about the founder of BuzzFeed, and the founder of BuzzFeed did this interview where he was talking about the basic idea behind something like BuzzFeed, which obviously deals with stories that are meant to go viral. They will design stories that go viral, and the founder of BuzzFeed, as you can probably guess, was extremely fascinated with this idea of how do you make things go viral, and early on started experimenting with articles and stories that were meant to really be contagious. And what he went back to when he was describing this was, the reason stories go viral is because they make people feel. And so what you're doing when you're sharing an article online, when many people are doing it, and it goes that in that viral category, people are essentially sharing the emotions that they've felt. And you can probably see this sometimes too. And there are articles that often go viral just based on the title of the article alone, like the log line or the byline, which is essentially a log line for the article, but the byline of whatever article it is designed to hook you, is designed to make you, to feel like, to feel betrayed about something, or to feel like, oh, this is terrible. How can they be doing this? And then you share it with all the people that you follow. And the funny thing about that is and I'm sure you've had experience with this too, many people who will share these stories, share these things that go viral, haven't read the entirety of the article. Or if they have read the entirety of the article, they've really just kind of breezed through it and they don't remember the specifics from it. But they do for sure remember how it made them feel. It made them angry, made them sad, made them inspired, whatever it was. That's what we want to leave people with our pitches. That's what we want to leave people with when it comes to a movie that they're seeing or a show that you're watching. So we're talking about emotions here. And how do we create these emotions? How do we so it's important to get an executive to feel something in a pitch, but how do we create that emotion? How do we make an executive actually feel that? This is another reminder from, if any of you have spoken with me before in any like mentorship sessions or anything like that, or if you've listened to the previous webinar, I talked a little bit about this, but you cannot create emotions in people who are listening to your story unless you have a character that we identify with and that we feel these emotions through. We feel emotions through characters. You've probably all seen very dull movies or very dull television shows where there are lots of things happening. There are all these bells and whistles and explosions and things going this way and that way and all these things happening. But we don't really care because we haven't been able to relate to or identify with any of the characters in a way that really matters. I hope Roland Emmerich isn't watching this or won't watch this at some point, but a perfect example of where something like this went wrong is if you go and take a look at the movie 2012. It's full of thrilling action and set pieces and big end of the world type effects. And, you would think that, oh, the world is ending, so we should just inherently care that this is happening. But what that script and that story, the movie ended up doing is there are like 12 different viewpoints at least in there, and not enough time for us to care about any one of them. So when all this stuff is happening, it's just this bland stuff that's just being thrown at us on the screen. It's a similar effect to like some of the more recent Avenger movies where there's all sorts of flashy things going on, but very little emotion being engaged because we haven't really been able to invest in any one character's story in a very strong way. So, you'll see that certain characters are put into danger, but we couldn't really care less. You have to make, in your pitches and in your stories, you have to make that point of view of your protagonist very specific. You have to make it personal. You have to make the person who's watching your story, who's listening to your story, who's listening to your pitch, you have to make them feel a personal connection to that character in order for them to care about that character being put into danger. There's a similar phenomenon that unfortunately happens in real life, and I'm sure you've all experienced this in some way or another, where, I'm ashamed to admit it happens to me, where someone can come and tell me about a threat that's happening to someone halfway across the world, and it's someone I've never met, someone who really means nothing to, I don't know them from anyone, but this terrible thing has happened to them. But I kind of shrug my shoulders, because what does that affect me? It's an unfortunate human phenomenon, but it's something that's very true. However, if you tell me about something dangerous that's happened to my neighbor or my family member or a friend, or if it's something dangerous that could happen in my backyard, then I care, right? So what is that difference there? It's because the threat feels personal to me. So you want to make your characters relatable and identifiable. And that's key. That's a key foundation for your story. Like, make sure that your character feels like someone's neighbor, feels like their family member, that we care about them, so that when they are put in danger, we really care about what is happening to them. And then we start to feel the emotions through the character. So, there are many pitches out there and many shows. I've seen shows like this recently that have been made, and, often things will get made, but people will agree that, that's some terrible writing going on there, or they won't be renewed for second seasons, or there'll be disasters at the box office. So there are many stories and things or many pitches and many shows and interesting concepts and worlds that are made or whatever, but they don't tell stories. They don't tell an actual story. A story is a situation in which a relatable, identifiable character makes choices that lead to consequences. And those consequences lead to further consequences and further actions from the characters. So if there is not a character that we care about who is moving through and acting in a way that affects the concept or the world that you've created, like, if you don't have that, then you're not telling me a story. You're not telling an executive a story. You're showing that executive a concept, right? I hope that makes sense. And the thing is that concepts don't sell from newer writers. They don't. Concepts will sell when there's a proven storyteller behind them. Go look at, I encourage you all to go look up like the trailer for a Steven Spielberg movie, like a recent Steven Spielberg movie, like especially Ready Player One, I think, is a perfect example of this. Ready Player One, directed by Steven Spielberg. If you go look at the trailer that's out there right now, and for those of you who are watching this in the future, because I know these webinars last for quite a while, I'm doing this at the very beginning of September in 2013. So go look at the summer of 2013, 2017. Sorry, I traveled back in time for a second. So look at the summer 2017 trailer for Ready Player One. You will see that pitch for that movie is being sold as a concept. I was looking at it last night in preparation for this to kind of give some examples of things. That's a perfect example of a world that's being sold as a concept, and because I couldn't tell you what the hell that story is. I mean, they present us kind of with the lead character, but they don't really give us a sense of what the personal problem that lead character is having. But what they do heavily sell in that trailer is that this is from the mind of Steven Spielberg. Now, Steven Spielberg can get away with that because audiences show up for him. You know, they show up for the same way they show up for a Chris Nolan movie. Like look up the Dunkirk, or look up the trailer for Dunkirk, or look up the trailer for Inception. They don't really tell you what the movie's about. You know, you're like, what is that? But you see, oh, this is from Chris Nolan, a storyteller who's proven himself. I'm going to go for a Chris Nolan movie. I'm going to go for a Steven Spielberg movie. That's unfortunately not a position that a writer breaking into Hollywood is going to find themselves in. You can't say this is, I can't even say this to, I couldn't say this to most people. This is from the mind of Chris Deckard. So, you know, listen to me, it'll be great. I mean, I've built up some reputation now with a number of executives around town where, you know, I can tell certain people, trust me, this is good, and they'll read it. But it's taken a long time to build a specific relationship with that executive. It's not something that's going to be, you know, I can't sell that way to people who don't know me. So, and I did say that concepts don't sell, you know, and they don't unless you're a proven storyteller. Now, here's the thing. Every now and then you will hear stories, and like apocryphal stories about writers who have managed to win the lottery essentially and sell a script that's basically just a concept. It does happen, but it is like, it's the equivalent of winning the lottery in Hollywood. And I would not recommend that people base their upcoming careers on this, because it's highly, highly, highly unlikely. Even if you do end up selling a concept-based script, you're going to be rewritten. If you're a writer who sold something that's a concept and the story is crap, people are not going to come back to you, because you're not going to sell another script. You're not going to have a long-lasting career. You're not going to be able to build to anything from that script. That one script that someone sells or someone gets optioned, because usually that's really what script sales are, is a much smaller fee. That's an option fee. That's an option to purchase someday down the line. The small amount of money that you get is for an option script is never going to outweigh, or it's not going to be enough to make up for the fact that someone has had to rewrite you, and then you're not going to be able to use that relationship or that script sale to build into something else. So don't stake your careers on selling concepts. Stake your careers on your ability to build and tell stories. So our relatable character, right? Our relatable character should, in every story, should actively be putting themselves into a situation that demands a resolution. I want to go back over that again. Your relatable character, right? So the relatable character that we've talked about should actively put themselves, should be making choices. They should be making choices that put themselves into a situation that demands a resolution. So think about it like this. You know, someone in a bad situation has to make a choice to finally get out of that bad situation. That's one type of story arc that you can have. Or you can have someone who starts off in a really good situation, who starts to make bad decisions that will possibly make their world fall apart. These are, you know, you hear these types of stories, like you hear a story about, like you hear stories and you hear these setups to these stories, and you need to know what happens next. That's the feeling you want to create in an executive, is they should be hearing about a character taking an action that demands a resolution. Like, let's say, you know, just spitballing here, but let's say you've got a story about a young kid who, you know, every day as he walks home from school, he's getting bullied. Every day he's got things thrown at him by this specific person. There's this one person who throws insults his way, who makes fun of his clothes, who throws things at him, who basically makes this kid run home in tears every single day. This kid is in a bad situation, right? One day, as this kid is walking home, he decides to do something different. Even though he knows this kid is bigger than him, even though he knows he's probably going to get beat up by this kid if he doesn't run away crying, He can no longer let this happen to him anymore. So he decides to take an action. He decides to go over and tell the bully to stop. Now, if I just move on from this after getting you to care about this kid that's getting, that's being bullied, and then building up to him, like, finally deciding to take an action, you're going to want to know, well, what happened? Like, what happened? Like, after he went off and, said something to the bully, which is something he's avoided day after day after day, what was the resolution there? You presented us with a relatable character, someone who's getting bullied, who's put into who is in a bad situation, who takes an action to potentially pull themselves out of that bad situation. But what happens? Does the kid get beat up? Does it actually work? Do they become friends? Does something completely different happen? We don't know, but we want to know. You have to make someone hearing your pitch want to know what happens next in the story. And if you move on, like if I started telling you a story and then just, moved on to a bunch of different plot points, before I've gotten to that hook being the desire to know what happens next. If you haven't gotten me to that hook point, and then you start giving me, and then a car comes in, and then there are all these helicopters that come at them, and then there are explosions everywhere. I'm like, but wait a minute, I don't really care about what's happened because you haven't hooked me yet. So your goal in any pitch that you're delivering is you need to create an expectation that something needs to happen next. It's similar to when you're telling a joke. If you're properly telling a joke, you create the need for a punchline. You set up a situation where people are dying to hear what that punchline is, and they're not going to be satisfied unless they get that punchline. That is the same type of feeling you want to create in every pitch that you tell. And if you haven't hooked someone in your pitch doing something like that, if you haven't made them feel that expectation and want that resolution, you haven't successfully pitched, and you haven't really told a story. So, how do we then, knowing that we need to create expectations, different types of stories demand different types of situations and different types of expectations. And your pitch should match that tone of whatever story it is that you're trying to tell. You need to, when you have a screenplay and you're devising your pitch, you need to really dig in deep and figure out what emotions are we supposed to be feeling in this movie? What emotions are readers who are sitting down to read your script, what should they be feeling as they're going through the story? You pull out those key major emotions, and those are the emotions that you should be conveying and creating in your pitch. So, especially if you've got a specific genre pitch, like if you're pitching in a specific genre, if you're writing a story in a specific genre, pull out those key genre specific moments that arise in the story that make us feel something related to that genre. And those emotional moments should be things that arise from the character that we've been made to care about, should be arising from that character being affected in some way. So different genres create different expectations, right? Like if you're talking about a rom-com, like a romantic comedy, you would start off with the idea that, these two people that we're supposed to care about, are not together, right? But we have to create the expectation that they're perfect for each other. They should be together, like they're complementary sides to the same coin, and that they need to get together by the end of the script. So then once you create that need to see them end up together, then you start showing this is how they're going to get together. And also these are the consequences that keep them apart along the way. In a horror script, right? You need to show that your relatable character is presented with some sort of danger. There's some sort of danger that's presented to them. And the expectation that's created is that your character needs to figure out a way to survive that danger, and then along the way, people die, things happen, You know, the characters put at risk until we find out at the very end, are they going to live or are they going to die? In an action movie, you'll see some similarities here to the horror, you know, the way horror expectations are created, right? You present a danger to the main character. The character needs to stop that danger to them or to the world that they care about, to the people that they care about in that world. And then, you know, as the character goes out to stop this danger, people die and things blow up and things happen along the way. In a mystery, a problem, again, see, something that's happened in all of these so far is that a problem has been created and a character has to figure out how to solve it, right? And since we identify with the character, we want to see that problem being solved. You've hooked us with that problem that needs a resolution. So in a mystery, a problem is presented to the character that we don't know how to solve. The character needs to figure out the answer to that problem. And then along the way, all sorts of red herrings are put along the path to keep them from figuring out the solution to the mystery. In a drama story, now these are like the ultimate, like, basic elements of any type of story, and you find this in all of it. But in a straight drama, a character makes a choice or several choices that make their lives either better or worse. And the need that's created when someone's hearing that story is, will these good choices work, or will the character be making choices that end up being bad for them in the long run? It's all about choices. It's all about a problem being created by choices and solutions being attempted by choices as well. That's what you need to, those are the hooks of your story, and that's what you need to present in your pitch. And if you're presenting those, you're going to make someone feel that when they're listening to the pitch. So identify those moments in your script, right? Those moments that are key to those genres, that are key to those essential elements of your story. And then you want to, in your pitch, find ways to make us feel those emotions that you've identified in your script that are emblematic of the story that's attempting to be told. So you want to make us feel humor. You want to make us feel sadness. You want to make us feel fear, feel the need for justice or vengeance, feel embarrassment, feel joy, feel mystery. These are all things that you can create in a short amount of time if you've made us care about a character and you put them in a situation, and you put that character in a situation that would naturally create those types of emotions, and you tell us about it when you're pitching it to us. So let's take some examples like that need for justice or vengeance, right? How do we create that feeling? You create that feeling by making me care about a daughter who's then kidnapped and we need to get her back. Or that need for vengeance, you make me care about somebody who is murdered, and then we have to bring that killer to justice. We have to, or we have to go outside the bounds of the law to make that stop and never happen again. There's another thing here. So sadness, make me fall in love with a character and then tragically take them away from me. That's going to make me feel sad in your pitch, right? These are all very basic, but I'm showing you how basic it is so that you can see that it's possible to do this. Joy, make a character relatable, then make them fight very hard to wait, sorry, I'm getting a little mixed up on my notes. So just give me a second here. So make a character relatable. This is to create joy, right? Or one way to create joy. Make a character very relatable, make them fight for something, make them fight really hard to figure out how to defeat something. And then, at the end, give them an unexpected win. So for the course of your story, you're showing how it's not going to work, but they're still trying. They're trying so hard. And then finally, they unexpectedly win this thing. It's such a sense of relief. It's such a sense of joy and accomplishment that you create in someone who's heard that. In a mystery, right? Present a problem that should be easy to solve, but for some reason it's not, and that's a type of thing that, it should be easy to solve. It should be easy to figure out, but why isn't this working? That kind of frustration is the sense that you want to create in a mystery story, right? Also, if you're creating fear or suspense for a thriller or a horror story, show the person who's hearing your pitch, let them know the consequences of something that's going to happen, but then don't let them know that the character is going to survive. Like, we know that something terrible is going to happen. We know that if they walk around that corner, there is a masked man with a machete behind it, but then show them starting to walk around that corner. Then we're left in suspense. We're left wondering, is this going to happen? It's fear, it's tension, it's thrilling, it's on the edge of your seat feeling that. Let us know that something's going to be there, but don't let us know whether we're actually going to face it when we're about to turn that corner. So further examples of this, I'm going to go back to a concept that we talked about in the last pitch webinar. Go and watch trailers. Go and watch the recent trailers that have come out and see examples of how people are pitching stories in 2 minutes. Just go to YouTube and put in trailers, movie trailers 2017, and you'll see many examples that you can watch through. I encourage you all, set aside a half hour of your time and just blast through watching a number of these trailers. But then take another step and really pay attention to the ones that make you feel something, and note that if you're watching a trailer and it doesn't make you feel something, you're not going to want to go watch that movie. If the trailer hasn't convinced you that, oh, I have to go see that movie, I want to go experience those emotions on a big screen, I want to spend 2 hours of my time watching that on the screen. Do you see the parallels there with pitching and reading a script? It's the same exact concept. So, examples of, I was watching some trailers last night just to wrap my head around this a little more too. Go watch the trailer for It, for Stephen King's It. It's obviously the remake that's coming out this week. You don't even have to necessarily be a fan of horror stories to see what that trailer does effectively. The trailer in 2 minutes gives you a very strong storyline. It establishes the world. It establishes the point of view of a main character, or actually a very tight-knit group of main characters who is then presented with a problem that could potentially turn their world upside down and is starting to eat away at their world. And then a problem is presented that they decide they're the only ones that know that are going to be able to solve it. And then they're faced with problems along the way. And wouldn't you know it, those problems are scary. Those problems are frightening. And it creates those exact emotions that feature that the movie is going to make you feel when you actually go into the theater to watch it. Look at these trailers, and then, pay attention to the trailers that don't feel like they work. Like, why aren't they working? They probably are presenting you with more of a thrilling concept, or they don't have a strong, viral, communicable story in them. We all, whether we're people watching trailers to go be an audience for a movie, or whether we're executives sitting down to hear a pitch, we all want to know if a movie or a script is going to make us laugh or cry or be scared or feel joy or whatever. We're going to want to know that it's going to make us feel something, because if it doesn't make us feel something, honestly, like, we all have better things to do with our time, this could also, and we could talk about this a little bit more in like in like question and answer stuff, but sometimes writers, I hear, and I've heard this before, are afraid about giving away too much. You don't have to tell us exactly how your story is going to end, but you have to make us feel that the story is going to demands an ending. Like, if your story does not demand an ending, like if we're not expecting something, if we don't have an emotion created in us that we need to see fulfilled, we're not going to care. So show us your cards. Show us what that is. If your story ends on a very high, jubilant note and it's all about this sense of triumph, then go ahead, show us the end of your story. Make us feel that triumph, because that triumph, that feel good, that just great feeling is going to be the thing that an exec is going to be able to communicate when they're in a, when they're in their Monday weekend read meeting with the rest of their department saying, I read this fantastic script over the weekend. It made me feel this, it made me feel that. And they're going to have to pitch that same idea in a very succinct way too. So make us feel something. You can reveal your endings. Don't worry about that. It's, if your ending is necessary to make us feel the most important emotions of your script, then give us your ending in your pitch. Unless you're M. Night Shyamalan and you need to hide the ending of your movies in order to work your gimmick, which I encourage most of you or all of you not to do, then unless you're that, give us your ending. Show us what we're going to feel along the way. Again, I'm not going to remember specific plot points. I'm going to remember emotions. So, and this is how we can wrap it up for the lecture part of this. So we want to go back to why people like stories to begin with, right? Why do people want to feel stories? Why do people need to feel stories? Why has the art of storytelling been with us as long as our species has been around, right? We want these things because they make us feel something. We want them because they help us to make sense of the world. We identify with characters who then go on these journeys that they themselves are trying to make sense of the world and bring a sense of order to all this chaos that we're dealing with, and if we identify with them, we feel their emotions and we feel some sense of order in our lives that's given to us. You can see this phenomenon happening in cultural stories, religious stories, theoretical science, and in entertainment. It's something that we as a species just generally need. There's a bigger concept in here about the whole idea of making sense of the world, but we don't really have the time to get into that today. But it's definitely there. And the way to access that and the way to make people care about your script and to care about your pitch and want to go that next step with you is to really make them feel something when they're hearing your pitch. So I hope that's been clear enough for everyone. I hope that adds a little bit more to what we talked about last time. And I hope it's giving you some practical ways that you can kind of dissect your own scripts and create very engaging emotional pitches. But I think we do have a little bit of time here to answer follow-up questions if any of that wasn't clear. And I'm perfectly well aware that some of it may not be clear because I'm kind of talking into the void right now. So ready for any questions you may have.
Awesome. I'm here in the void with you, Chris. That was great.
There you are.
Okay, so some people have been asking questions. If it's easier for you, I can just ask you them from the chat box. Does that work?
Yeah, that would work.
Great. Okay. This says you spoke of heat early on and not to worry about people who can't be moved. Yet I've had execs, this particular writer has had execs who were enthusiastic, hanging on every word, and then didn't want to read the script. And then the opposite. One seemed bored and openly on during the pitch and then requested the script. Can you discuss this apparent contradiction?
Yeah, that is a contradiction. And it's hard. Again, I don't think I'm going to be able to give you a full answer because the way to really know is to know what was going on in that exec's mind. I have had instances where I feel like I'm pitching to someone who is a blank wall. There's no emotion going on here. You see nothing going on in their eyes. They're basically just talking some people just have a very flat affect, and some people, might be very mentally engaged with something or might be looking for something very specific. But you can't account, you're not going to be able to please everyone or account for everyone and everything. I do think that the more disturbing part of that question to me is the idea of an exec who was riveted with every word, who was really feeling something and into it, and then didn't end up requesting it. It's going to happen. you can't always, I mean, you just can't account for things. Sometimes I will pitch something to an executive. They'll really love the pitch. They'll even request the script, and they'll read the script and they'll say, we don't like it, but for blah, 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 like whatever reason, they can't do anything with it. I think that's a problem more specific to a particular executive. The only thing that you or I or any of us can control is what we make people feel in the moment that we're talking with them. Once that's over, you just can't account for whether someone's going to request it or not. But the thing you can do as a storyteller, and I would think if you are a storyteller, you're gonna really get something from this, is if you can create an emotion in someone. Who cares if ultimately they don't end up listening to it? You know that you've affected them on some level, and you can use that same pitch to greater effect with someone else who maybe is more open to hearing something.
That's helpful. That's great. Okay. Here's a question. In a drama pitch where you have an A, B, and C story, is it wise to pitch only one and let the exec read all three in the script?
So I think what you could do, like without having seen that straight drama script, what I typically like to do is pick out what I think is probably the strongest, most central storyline and really lead with that. I've had instances where I've got different storylines that, depending on who I'm pitching to, like if it's, I hate to be sexist about this, but if it's a man, like I'll probably pitch the story from the more masculine perspective. If it's a woman, I'll probably pitch it from the more feminine perspective. I'll have different versions of my pitch depending on who I'm giving it to. If it is a straight drama where everyone has an equal amount of time in the story, because what you want is an accessible window for the person who's listening to your pitch. And if one of your characters is just really like out of left field that you don't feel anyone can really identify with, leave them out of your pitch. I would also even say, like, maybe find a way to leave them out of your script. But lead with the stronger story, get them invested in the stronger story, see how they're responding, and then maybe give a little bit of a tease into the other storylines that feed into that bigger storyline.
Yeah, this writer followed it up with a Sex and the City comp, but I think that they sort of do that. It's Carrie, and then it's her friends. So if you're pitching it, it's probably Carrie.
Exactly. And I think this is something I've talked about this a lot with different writers, is all of us have so much experience watching mid-season episodes of shows where we see all sorts of different viewpoints like coming in and out of the story, that sometimes we forget what that first pilot episode, like how that worked. And so a lot of people will write a pilot episode in the format of a mid-season episode where there's all these intersecting storylines and all these crazy things happening, but we're not able to invest in any one of them. Go back to those first pilot episodes, and more often than not, you're going to see that we've accessed the world through a much smaller point of view, because you don't have enough time in 60 minutes, and much less in 5 minutes or less that you have to pitch, to really get someone invested in a character. So, just that's another thing to think about.
Yeah. Okay. This question is, are my written and spoken pitches built off each other? And my written pitch, as I hopefully make it relatable, what main points of the script should I include? Is explaining the character's arc a must-have? So a few points in there. Let me know if you want me to repeat.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably something I do answer. I think several of those questions in the previous pitch webinar. I do encourage that particular writer to take a look at that, and you'll see it's much more laying out specifics about the pitch. This is more building off of that. So
okay, cool. It says, hi Chris, fantastic lecture. You gave me some terrific feedback on a pitch a few weeks ago, mentioning that the character's internal growth and journey ought to be the main focus. Keeping this in mind, what's an insightful way for a pitch to stand out for you from the get-go, especially when you're pitched dozens of projects, in a single day? What helps to make a pitch different in a positive way right from the beginning?
I mean, I'm constantly listening for those kind of four elements that I think are essential in any story, which is a relatable, identifiable character, an immersive setting, a strong plot arc, where there's like a story that demands a resolution that we talked about here today. And then one of the most important things, even though I'm saying it's like number four, it's something that if I don't sense it in the pitch, I'm probably questioning whether the writer even has it in the story anyway, is that strong character arc, and this goes to something I was kind of alluding to at the end of the lecture, which was, how do we get people to feel like they have really made sense of their life and their world? Because the best stories, the best movies are going to make people question or think about their world in a different way. There are lots of things that are disposable entertainment out there that will have those first three qualities. But if you want your story to really rise above the rest, it's going to have to make me feel like I'm going to question, I'm going to look at my world differently along the way. And the only way to do that is to show that the character, the lead protagonist's like life and their outlook has been changed in some way. Because again, we've invested ourselves into that protagonist such that anything that happens to them, we're going to feel along the way. So if they feel fear, they feel joy, they feel, or like I'm saying here now, they feel like they've had a fulfilling character arc and they've learned something that's changed their entire outlook on life. That's going to make something stand out to me, and it's a little more complex as to how to get into that than I think we're going to be able to address here. And it's often case by case, depending on how you're, it's hard to talk about in a vacuum. Like that's when where you really do examples of, what is the main character missing inside themselves that they need to realize by the end. And it's a triumphant story if they do realize it and figuring it out in the end. It's a tragic story if they never figure it out, but we realize that they should have.
I like that. Not that you need my approval, but I like that. Okay.
Approval doesn't hurt,
Okay, when you do phone pitches, how much time do you spend on warm-ups?
That is a lot of this. I'm going to keep saying is case by case. It really is. Unfortunately, it is. Now, if it's a blind call, there's the way I do it from my, what I have to do in my business. And that is usually if I'm calling someone I've never met, I'll usually give them a little more, a little more of a warm up because they have to feel like they can trust me. If I already know them, then I'm probably going to cut to the chase a little sooner. Now for a writer who is pitching to, which I'm assuming is what the real core of this question is, for a writer who's pitching to someone they've never met before that they don't know, I would say this is also about getting into the perspective of the exec who's sitting down to listen to your pitch. If you have 15 minutes or so to pitch to someone, spend a little more time getting to know each other. I would, it doesn't have to be a lot, but just enough where they feel comfortable. Now, if you're pitching in a time crunch situation where the executive is going to has heard 5 people before you or more than that, and 5 people or more people after you, they're probably pretty warmed up to the whole process anyway. By the time they get to you, they're there to hear pitches. They're warmed up. They're ready to hear things. That's where I would cut to the chase a lot quicker. I would just I like it more like when people pitch to me, if I don't know someone on the other end of the line and I'm hearing, and it's one of 20 pitches that I'm hearing that day, I'd rather them just get into making me care about a character. And maybe one way you could warm up to that is, sometimes you can ask questions about one particular pitch that I have for a client that I don't know how effective this is going to be because I can't give away the details, but I always open up that pitch with a, have you heard about this? Have you heard about this concept? And then I know the answer is going to be no, that they've never heard this before. So then I start to explain it to them. And then me explaining that to them gives me automatic credibility because I've opened up their eyes to something they didn't know about before, and they're fascinated by it. And then I can go deeper into the pitch. Now, if there are ways that you can build off of that type of concept, depending on what type of pitch you're telling people about, that's a way you could warm up to it, engage them, because you're engaging that emotion, that mystery type emotion, that sense that we need something to be resolved. Because if someone feels like there should be a simple answer to a question, but I don't know the answer to it, you've engaged me, right? Because I need to know the answer to it. And then you can get into your pitch.
I like that. Again, you don't need my approval, but I'm just like, great. There's actually a similar question a couple down, so I'm going to skip to it. You didn't mention anything about our personal connection to the material. So if that's important to mention in the pitch, is that something that people should include in the story, which sort of goes with that warm-up idea you're talking about, I think?
Well, so I usually prefer to tell a personal connection. I usually prefer that when it's told to me after I've heard the pitch. Like if someone says to me, like they've engaged me in the pitch, they've gotten me to really care about it, they've led me think, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, how is this story real? And then at the end you say, and this is something I actually lived through. Then you've like blown my mind. It's like, oh my God. I do have a particular pitch where for a client team where I tell, so this client team has a script. When I'm pitching it, the build up to the pitch is like, oh my God, there's this crazy thing going on in the world. And like, this whole thing is based on a true story, but like, it's so crazy that, and it's so common that people are kind of scared by the idea that this is like, could be in our backyards. And then I tell them, and this exact story happened an hour outside of LA. And they're like, oh my God, that's where I say see, that's the personal connection part of it, which is like the reason my clients were able to write this is because they grew up in the town where this happened, which is an hour outside of LA, which connects it directly to you, the listener who's hearing it. Now, if you tell people ahead of time that I'm about to tell you a true story that really happened to me, it's going to raise the kinds of questions you don't want to have raised, which is, what's going to be going on in the head of someone who's been doing this long enough, who's been listening to pitches and working with writers long enough is this writer capable of distancing themselves enough from the story enough from the real story in order to make for an effective true story? And that leads into a deeper concept that we don't have time to get into, which is just that idea of like, if something has happened to you, more often than not, it's going to be hard for you to prune away certain things that you're like, oh no, but it actually happened like that. It's like, yeah, the story may have actually happened like that, but we're telling a story that belongs in a movie. And if it doesn't work on the movie level, it doesn't matter if it actually happened like that in real life. So that's, those are all reasons why I would like to hear it more at the end of the pitch.
Okay, speaking of end of the pitch, there's a question about that. When is it best to withhold the ending in a pitch? You touched on that not only now, but a little bit earlier, but
yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
I mean, more often than not, I would say go ahead and give the ending to the pitch, because you want people to feel emotions in your pitch, and people feel like they've heard a story when they're given a satisfying resolution to something, and if someone in your pitch feels a satisfying resolution and they feel that joy, that sense of justice, that whatever that fulfilling sense is, if they've felt that by the end of your pitch, then if they're meant to work with you, they're going to want to ask for that script. So the only time I would say maybe leave out the ending of your pitch, like the only time that really makes sense as in a broader sense is if you are telling a twisty, turny type of mystery story where the whole emotion or sense that you're creating in someone is the need to figure something out. Like if the whole story is meant to be about the need to figure out this problem that we can't figure out because there are all these twists and turns, then maybe in that case leave out the ending. But in almost every other instance, like make me feel that overall emotion. Like what if someone told you the pitch to the movie Rudy and left out the triumphant ending? Like,
say that again. Sorry, cut out right when.
Cut out at the worst
Oh,
possible
no.
moment. Well, that's perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Wait, what did you say?
very on point. No, but I was saying the movie Rudy, right? That triumphant sport movie Rudy. If we didn't have that sense of triumph at the end of this, that could sound like a very depressing film. This kid plays football for, he's pushing his whole life and his blah, and then at the very last, they won't even let him play in the end of the game. Or will they? Like, that's not the kind of emotion you want to create. Like, that's not going to get someone to want to read the script. But if you tell them, like, you went through all of this, it was so hard, and then finally in the last, the last moments of the game, like they let him play and he wins for them, and it's a true story. That's a satisfying ending, and that's something where people are like, oh, I want to feel that again. I think other people would be into that. Give away that ending,
Great. And since you're kind of talking a little structure, a structure question came in. So do you like hearing the log line first before someone dives into their pitch?
Yeah, typically I would say. Yes. And go back to the previous webinar where I talk a lot more about, I do talk about log lines in general and what I think they're effective for and why I think, certain ones work and certain ones don't. And just to touch on that very briefly again, like a log line is meant to get me to want to hear the pitch, to get me to want to read the script. So you should also hit on those four elements of any story that I talked about just a moment ago.
Great. Okay. This writer, Terry, says, Chris, your thoughts on creating characters exec/managers can relate to in the pitch if your characters are far removed from the world of the exec manager. So she wants your thoughts on that. Like a lot of her characters are women in the late 40s and 50s, and the people I'm pitching to are decidedly not in that demographic.
Yeah. Well, that's where we get into we're all human and we all face problems. So find the kernel of the problem that your character faces that we can identify with. Is it a problem of embarrassment, right? Is it a problem of the need for justice? Is it a problem of fear? Like that's something you can get people to identify with, and the way and other ways to, so that's one part of it, right? Like you put someone into a situation like as quickly as possible, where it's like, this person, you don't have to get into the specific demographics of the character, but this person has been put in a situation where they're, led to feel like this. And if you can focus more on the situation that's created that ends up generating that emotion, then you focus on the demographics of the character, then you can kind of slide by that, like, well, this is a 40-year-old woman, or this is a kid on the other side of the world. Like, how do we end up caring about people like that? We're all human in some sense. We all experience the same emotions unless we're like psychopaths and sociopaths and don't feel any emotions at all. But I would say, it's a little more than we can get into now, but you put characters in sympathetic situations where we feel like I have been there myself. I know what it's like to feel this. I know what it's like to feel that. That's how you can make people relate to someone, regardless of, what they may look like or how old they may be or whatever, or where they may live.
Can you give some thoughts on the differences between verbal and written pitches? Should the written pitch be a bit more in depth since they can't ask you questions like they can in the verbal?
I think you can get into a little more depth in the verbal pitch, but I'm concerned about people taking that to the extreme because I see that a lot where people will. The biggest problem I see people doing in their written pitches is to lay out every twist and turn of the plot. Like this happens, and then this happens, and then it leads to this, and then this goes on. That I'm gonna glaze over when I read that. Because the more important thing to do there, again, is to identify the spine of your story that is created by the actions of your lead protagonist and show me how that lead protagonist is going to solve their external problem and their internal problem that leads to their fulfilling character arc. Like everything else is just kind of window dressing. You don't need to tell me everything that happens in your pitch. What I would recommend a lot of people do is, your verbal pitches at times would be stronger, or not your written pitches would at times be stronger if you did your oral verbal pitch or whatever, if you design that first, because that will tell you what is most important in your story and what isn't the most important, right? And then from there, you can decide how much extra color do we want to add into my written pitch. I've seen, and I've worked with writers through Roadmap who have done very effective single page pitches. And, there might even be is there someone on today? Yeah, I do think one of the writers who's on here today, who was on here at least earlier, he had a very effective one-page pitch that we went back and forth on. And what we tightened up in there was, let's get rid of the extraneous details. Let's focus more on what we can, what drives that central storyline forward and what makes this character's problem as identifiable as possible. And that was a one-page pitch. And if you really get down to it, the actual pitch part of it was smaller than a page because he had like the log line, the setting, things like that. And, people sometimes feels like, well, I'll get pitches where they're 2 pages long and the margins are really small and the type is really small. It's like, that's not the point of a pitch is not to tell me everything that happens in your story. It's to get me to feel something and to care enough to want to sit down and read your entire story.
I was just relaying with a writer about a written pitch, and it was that idea that, especially like I was thinking about headshots necessarily. Yeah. So these people who see this constantly can identify when something's a little off. So the margins were small, and I was like, someone's going to look at this who sees this constantly, and it's off. And you're even more right about the motivation behind the pitch itself. But it was one of those things where it's like, just visually, immediately, they're going to see that this is not standard, and it's going to stick out, and you're going to glaze over early on because you're going to be like, I'm not going to sit through the rest of this, even.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to, and I said this in the previous webinar, and I said it a couple times in this webinar. I strongly encourage all of you listening to this, whether now or whether in the future, if you're watching this as a recording, take some time and watch some trailers. Go watch some of the most recent, most effective trailers. It's very easy to search on YouTube for best trailers and see how they're able to create storytelling in the span of 2 minutes or less. It's also possible to, there's a story about Ernest Hemingway. And I may have some of you may have heard this before on your own or heard me talk about this. There's a story about Ernest Hemingway where and it shows like the power of storytelling in a small amount of space, where he was out with his editor. They were out at a bar and they were talking about storytelling in general. And Ernest Hemingway says, I bet you a round of beer for the entire bar that I can tell you a story in 6 words that will make you feel something. And the editor's like, I'll take that bet. You can't do that. And Ernest Hemingway is like, well, the stakes are, right? Like if I'm right, then, if I'm wrong, I'll buy a beer for everyone in this bar. If I'm right, then you have to go buy a beer for everyone in this bar. So the editor's like, sure, I'll take that bet. I can win this bet. So Ernest Hemingway takes a napkin, writes down 6 words, passes it over to the editor. The editor takes a look at it, thinks for a second, puts it down, gets up and walks over to the bartender and orders around for the entire bar. Now, what did that napkin say? That napkin had 3 sentences on it. Each sentence had 2 words. And this may not affect everyone the same way, but it does tend to create an emotion in people. First sentence, well, I'll just say it. So, baby shoes for sale, never worn. Right? And it clenches your gut a little bit when you hear that, because you're thinking, oh, the beauty of like baby shoes, and like the promise of like new life. And then and the happiness that creates. And then you hear this for sale and you're like, huh? Like, what does that mean? It's just like, why are we selling baby shoes? What's the why? And then the gut punch there is never worn, which implies many things, right? So if we're able to create a story in 6 words, you can certainly create a story in a single sentence, in 2 sentences of a log line, in 2 minutes of a trailer, in 1 page of a pitch document, in 8 minutes of a verbal pitch, or 5 minutes or 2, or whatever it is. It's possible to do that, but the way you do it is you make someone feel something.
Do you have a minute for a couple more or a couple more questions, or do you have to go? Because that's a great ending if you've got to go. We have 2 more questions if you have time.
If we can do the 2 more questions real quick, because I do have something I'll have to go to very soon here.
Okay, great. So we'll just throw them. I think they're pretty.
So hopefully they're not like really hardball questions, and I keep on a high note.
So the meaning of life can
definitely blaming it on you for.
That's fine. The meaning of life can be explained through storytelling, and go. No. So is pitching a manager different from pitching a producer or agent? For example, if I'm pitching a manager, would you advise me to pitch myself more than a specific project if you have a limited amount of time, or should we still focus on our best script?
Focus on your best script, no matter who it is, because I can tell you as as someone who's been on the management and agency side, like, and looked at things from an executive standpoint too. Like, if someone can't tell a story, I'm sorry. I don't care how many awards you've won. I don't care where you come from. Tell me a story first. That's the way you open the door. Then once you have me there, then we can talk about other things,
Yeah. And then this last one is sort of logistical as well. Is it okay to mention other films that are similar to the project you're pitching using comps?
Yeah, definitely. And I do talk about this in, I believe, the other webinar as well. So I do encourage everyone to go take a look at that. But just in general, pick comps that are recent, and pick comps that really match the tone of your screenplay. Another thing that you can sometimes do that I've found to be really effective but be honest about it when you do it, is to take 2 movies that on the surface feel as comps that look like they have nothing to do with one another, and say that it's like this meets this, because that'll create that kind of cognitive dissonance in the listener's mind, where they're like, how could those 2 possibly work together? That sounds intriguing. I want to hear this pitch, but be honest with it. Don't just do it just to catch someone's attention.
Sure. Okay, well, that's it. We're all out. Thank you so much, Chris. This was awesome. I hope everybody enjoyed it. You're getting lots of thank you, Chris's, in the chat box. So
thank you all for showing up today, and I hope it was helpful. And I'm sure I'll be crossing paths with some of you in the future. And even if I don't, I wish you all the best with all of your stories.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.